Thank you, Dr. Parisi. So I'm going to take us through a little bit of a journey to help you figure out how you can search for funding opportunities to support newborn screening research, and then provide some general tips for how to prepare a good application. So the first place that you should go is called the NIH Guide for Grants and Contracts, and I've included the URL at the top of this slide. This is the place where all funding opportunities are published, and any kind of new NIH policy updates and guidelines are also published through the NIH Guide. So one way that you can stay on top of all of these new publications is to subscribe, and you can get a weekly table of contents that summarizes all of the new notices, policies, and funding opportunities that were published that week. You can also develop a customized search, as I'm showing for doing newborn screening, and then you can save your search and receive notifications when new funding opportunities or notices are published that match your search criteria. I also want to really take a moment to shout out to the NBSTRN and highlight some of the various resources that they are able to provide to researchers. They're not just there to provide a letter of support for your application, but they can really help you thinking through questions around data sharing, visualization, and analysis through the Longitudinal Pediatric Data Resource. They also have a variety of work groups that are working to identify new resources that are needed by newborn screening researchers. The NBSTRN also provides many opportunities for collaboration. They just launched a recent forum feature on their website where you can discuss and communicate and collaborate with other researchers. They hold monthly calls for pilot studies to share their results and their lessons learned. There's this network meeting as well as their annual research summit. So there are a lot of opportunities that they facilitate to bring the researcher community together. NBSTRN has also put a lot of work into developing common data elements and have the ability to help you incorporate these as you're developing case report forms for your study. And this helps kind of collect data in a more uniform and standardized manner that makes it easier to compare results across studies. There's also, through the NBS conditions resource, a curated list of candidate conditions that experts have reviewed and believe that are good candidates for potentially being added to the RUSP or to state panels in the not too distant future. As Melissa mentioned earlier, there's the LC Advantage, which has a variety of really rich resources to help you think about some of the ethical, legal, and social issues that arise when doing newborn screening research. And finally, I just want to emphasize that this is a website that continuously evolves over time. New resources and tools are always being added, so make sure you check back frequently to see what new support is available for your project. So now I'm going to walk through a few active funding opportunities at NIH, and these are selected. This is not obviously the full list of everything that's available. I've tried to hand curate a few that I think might be of interest to the newborn screening community. But before I dive into some of those specialized opportunities, I want to take a moment to say that you can always apply through one of our parent announcements. And this is how any project is able to come into NIH. Any kind of new idea that doesn't really have a great fit in a specialized funding opportunity can always come in through a parent announcement. And the link at the top of this slide gives you a list of all of the current parent announcements for our various activity codes, things like the R01, R21, small business grants, and so on. So the first is a pair of opportunities to support collaborative research at the NIH Clinical Center, which is the largest research-focused hospital in the world. And so there are really unique opportunities to partner with researchers at the clinical center to expand your pool of potential participants or to do some innovative imaging or other kinds of clinical assessments. The next is an opportunity for small R01 grants that are clinical trials that target diseases within the mission of NIDDK. So this might be especially attractive to those of you working on inborn errors of metabolism. Next, we do also want to think about the broader picture and think about global health research as well. So this first opportunity listed here is looking at mobile health and how we can facilitate development of technologies and improvement of outcomes in low and middle income countries. And I point this out because NICHD has said in there that they are specifically interested in applications focused on newborn screening of hearing ability. And then finally, at the bottom of the slide, we also have a pair of funding opportunities to support research on brain and nervous system disorders across the lifespan. Finally, these are a couple of opportunities for small businesses. The first is what's called a Notice of Special Interest, or NOSI, that is designed to support research on developing innovative technologies to do things like improve assessments, interventions, and outcomes for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Now, I want to point out for those of you who are not familiar with NOCIs, this is an approach that NIH has been using increasingly over the last couple years to really draw attention to topics that we think are high priority research areas. And when you're applying to a NOCI, I want to remind you that you have to place the notice number in box 4B of the SF424 R&R form to be considered for that particular funding opportunity. So with this particular one that I've listed here, you would need to put NOT-HD-22-0009 in box 4B. So I just want to emphasize that you need to put that notice number in that location. The next opportunity on this slide is for administrative supplements. This particular one is designed to support diversity in research and development in small businesses. So administrative supplements are actually not standalone awards. They require that you already have a parent grant that is being actively funded by NIH, i.e. it wasn't a grant that just recently ended. So it has to be active, and this is essentially an add-on to a parent grant. And the scope of work that you propose within an administrative supplement needs to be, broadly speaking, within scope of the parent award. But this is a great opportunity for small businesses to try to bring in diverse trainees and team members to help improve the diversity of the biomedical research workforce. So now I'm going to take a few minutes and give you some general tips for preparing an application that hopefully will have the greatest chance of being successful. So the first piece of advice is to read the funding opportunity announcement closely. Even though there's some standard boilerplate that you might be tempted to skim through, there are really important specific instructions, things like application requirements, receipt dates, any kind of extra review criteria, which institutes or centers at NIH are participating in that funding opportunity. So it's really important to read through these extra carefully. As you're developing your specific aims, you want to try to make them realistic and achievable within the time period determined by the particular activity code. So for example, an R21 only provides 2 years of research support, whereas an R01 can provide up to 5 years of research support. So keep that timeline in mind as you're developing your specific aims, because you don't want to be overly ambitious with the scope of work that you're proposing. It's also helpful if you don't make your aims too interdependent on one another, so that, for example, if aim 1 fails, then aims 2 and 3 are doomed from the get-go. Don't be shy about contacting a program officer for help. Folks like Melissa and I are here to help you prepare your applications. It's our job to help you and to answer your questions. And we can give you advice about your specific aims, such as how they might align with our Institute's current scientific priorities, and also provide some suggestions on potential study sections that could review your application. As I'm sure we can all appreciate, it's very easy for emails to get lost in our inboxes, so don't be afraid to be persistent and send follow-up emails and bring that request back up to the top of our inbox. And finally, when you reach out to a program officer, it's helpful to have a one-page summary of your project's background and specific aims, because that'll help make our subsequent communications more effective, because so then we can tailor the advice that we give to your particular project. When you're developing your specific aims page, make it incredibly clear and compelling because this might be the only page in your application that reviewers might read. If they are part of a standing study section, they might have 80 or 90 applications that they're being assigned to review. And if they're not assigned as a specific reviewer to your application, at most they might skim your specific aims page. So make sure that you're selling your story on that page. If you are revising and resubmitting your application, make sure you are addressing all of the reviewer concerns because responsiveness to those critiques is something that is considered by the reviewers. As Melissa mentioned, there's been an increasing emphasis on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, not just at NIH, but broadly in our society. And so there's been increasing focus on making sure that our research participants and our study teams are as diverse as possible. So to the extent possible, I know it's not always easy with a rare disease, but do everything you can to make sure that you are including all people who are impacted by the condition. And then finally, read the funding opportunity announcement closely. I know I sound like a broken record, but it's so important I had to put it on here twice. This is really important. On this slide, I'm showing a few general writing resources that will help you as you prepare an NIH grant application, and especially want to point out the top two on this slide. Every year, NIH holds regional seminars that are kind of like NIH 101 and give a really comprehensive view of how to get funding and the whole process used to administer grants. And they have their presentations from last year online, so definitely encourage you to check those out. And then NICHD also has an incredibly comprehensive resource for researchers. They have helpful grant writing tips. They also have sample applications, so you can kind of see what a successful grant application might look like. And finally, I also want to point you to a program from the Center for Scientific Review that's called the Assisted Referral Tool. And this was developed to help both researchers and CSR figure out the best match for an application to a study section. And they do this based on the actual content in the application. So as I'm showing in the bottom right, you can input your title as well as your abstract and specific aims. And then this tool uses natural language processing and machine learning technology to make recommendations as to which study sections would be a strong match and a possible match. And from there, you can do a little more research on each of those recommended study sections. You can also see on each study sections page information about study sections that have overlapping interests, and that could help you further identify additional matches for your application. Now, finally, I want to end by giving you a brief overview of a new resource and a new policy that are coming that are going to represent big paradigm shifts for the community. So NIH this summer launched this new website, sharing.nih.gov, and I really encourage you all to go check this out. This is meant to be sort of a one-stop shop for all information from NIH about data sharing. It has guidance about multiple data sharing policies, and it has a wide variety of resources too. They have a policy decision tool that will help you identify which data sharing policies apply to your project. They have a variety of training resources, as well as upcoming webinars and presentations. And this is a fast-moving field, and this website is being updated regularly, so make sure you're checking back frequently. All of this is happening because NIH has a new policy for data management and sharing that goes into effect January 25th, 2023. So we're just about a half year away from this. And this is a huge shift for the researcher community because this new policy will now require all researchers to prospectively plan for how the scientific data they generate in their studies will be preserved and shared. The plans for how this will be done will be written out in what's called a Data Management and Sharing Plan, or DMS plan. And this is where you will outline how the data and metadata will be managed and shared, and taking into account any kind of restrictions or limitations on the sharing of those data. And I want to emphasize that this policy requires data to be managed it does not mandate that all data have to be shared. Obviously, you want to respect any kind of laws, policies, regulations, etc., that apply to your situation. Researchers will also have to comply with the DMS plan that they submit. Those plans are going to be reviewed by the funding institute or center and will be added as a term and condition of award to all new awards coming out after this effective date. So you'll need to be thinking about developing a plan that you can realistically comply with. And there may be additional requirements beyond what NIH has outlined in this new policy set by particular institutes and centers. This policy now applies to all research funded in whole or in part by NIH and includes both grants and contracts. Our prior data sharing policy only applied to large applications that were requesting only $500,000 or more in direct costs. This now applies to all grants, even the small RO3s. Finally, this policy says that data should be shared no later than the time of an associated publication or at the end of the performance period of the award, whichever comes first. So as I mentioned, the new sharing.nih.gov website has a lot of resources. I want to draw your attention to a few. The first is all of these are supplemental information documents that were published by NIH that outline things like allowable costs that you can put into your budget to help support data management and sharing activities, and how to select a repository for storing your data and sharing it with the broader community. And I'm going to take a moment here to talk about what actually goes into one of these DMS plans to give you a flavor of the kind of details that you need to start thinking about as you design your studies. So you'll need to discuss the types and amount of data that will be generated or used in your project, which of those data will be preserved and shared, as well as any metadata or other associated documentation like study protocols that you will be making available. And I want to pause here and say that scientific data that are subject to this policy do not include things like lab notebooks, preliminary analyses, completed case report forms, etc. The plans are also going to need to outline whether there are any specialized tools, software, or code that are needed to use or access the data, the names of those tools, and how other researchers can access those tools. Whether there are any standards being applied to the data or metadata, such as data formats or data dictionaries, plans and timelines for data preservation and access, including the repository or repositories, plural, that you'll be using for your data, how your data will be findable and identifiable, what kind of persistent unique identifier you'll be using, when data will be made available, and for how long those data will be available. Any kind of factors that impact the ability to access, distribute, or reuse your study's data. This includes restrictions outlined in the informed consent process, any kind of protections for privacy and confidentiality, and as I mentioned, any kind of restriction posed by law or policies. For those of you who might be working with American Indian or Alaska Native communities and tribes, you'll also need to take into consideration tribal laws and policies. And then finally, how you plan to monitor and manage your compliance with your DMS plan. So this is a rapidly moving field as we get ready to implement this new policy. That sharing.nih.gov website has a lot of resources that are continuously being added. I do want to highlight 2 upcoming webinars that NIH is holding to help investigators learn and become more comfortable with this policy coming up in August and September. So if your schedule permits, I would definitely recommend that you register for these. And then finally, if you've noticed the giant 60 in the corner of our slide, this year, NICHD turned 60 years old. So we have a big symposium planned for October 17th, focusing on healthy pregnancies, healthy children, and healthy and optimal lives. We've got a draft agenda up on this website and would encourage you to go and visit our 60-year anniversary webpage where you can learn more about NICHD's history, the key players and who got our institute established, and learn about our research priorities. And so with that, I would like to thank you all for your attention, and we look forward to your questions.